The ceremonial chamber erupted in chaos as Princess Zayla's suitor collapsed, his violet blood spreading across the crystalline floor. Captain Marcus Chen stood frozen at his post, hand hovering near his sidearm, watching the Valorian noble convulse. The third ambassador this month. The third unexplained medical emergency during the courtship trials. "Seal the chamber," commanded the Queen's voice, her 4 eyes gleaming in the prismatic light. "No one leaves until the physicians arrive." Marcus had served as Earth's representative guard for 6 months, stationed at the edge of the Grand Hall where the Zerine royal family conducted their ancient mating rituals. He'd learned to read the subtle shift of Princess Ayla's chromatic skin, the way her bioluminescent patterns flickered when she was displeased. Right now, those patterns blazed crimson. "He was weak," Jayla said, her voice carrying across the silent chamber. "Like all the others." The Queen Mother sat motionless on her throne, a massive figure carved from living stone in ancient privilege. She hadn't moved during the collapse, hadn't even blinked her multiple eyelids. Marcus had noticed this before. The Queen never seemed surprised. "Captain Chen." The voice turned to him. "You will escort the princess to her chambers while we investigate this incident." Marcus stepped forward, his boots clicking on crystal that had witnessed 10,000 years of Zerine history. He was a full head shorter than Zayla, his human frame dwarfed by her elegant height, but he'd learned that proximity to royalty meant reading silence like language. Zayla's skin pattern shifted to ice blue as he approached. Contempt or curiosity? He couldn't tell. "Follow me, Your Highness." She moved with lethal grace, her ceremonial robes flowing like liquid mercury. Marcus maintained the prescribed 3-step distance, his tactical training warring with diplomatic protocol. Behind them, medical drones descended on the fallen ambassador. The corridors twisted through the palace's organic architecture, walls pulsing with the building's own slow heartbeat. Marcus had memorized 17 evacuation routes, identified 32 defensive positions, and cataloged every entrance where an assassin might strike. Old habits from his service in Earth's Special Forces. "You think I'm poisoning them," Zayla said without turning. Marcus kept his expression neutral. "I think nothing without evidence, Your Highness. Liar." She stopped abruptly, forcing him to halt. Her skin flashed amber with amusement.
"You're military. You think everything is a threat?"
"Everything is a threat until proven otherwise." She studied him with eyes that saw in spectrums humans couldn't perceive. The Valorians can detect toxins in parts per billion. The Kelthans have redundant organ systems. The Mordesh ambassador had a neural shield that could stop a plasma bolt. Her patterns darkened to deep purple. Yet they all fell. "Tell me, Captain, what does your military mind conclude?" "That you should be in your chambers, Your Highness, where the security protocols are absolute." "My mother surrounds me with protocols and guards and sensors that can detect a hostile thought, yet suitors keep dying." She leaned closer, her breath carrying scents of cinnamon and ozone. "Why hasn't anyone suspected the one constant variable?" Marcus felt his pulse quicken. "Which is you." The accusation hung in the air like a blade. Marcus had survived 3 wars and 2 assassination attempts through careful control, but his hand still twitched toward his weapon before discipline locked it down. "I'm Earth's diplomatic representative," he said evenly. "I have no motive and no access to the suitors." "No motive?" Jayla's patterns rippled through a dozen colors. "Humans are ambitious. You're alone on an alien world, trusted by no one, watching as your species begs for trade agreements, while we choose partners from 1,000 worlds." Her voice dropped. "Perhaps you thought removing my suitors would force my mother to consider more democratic options." "Your Highness, or perhaps," she interrupted, circling him like a predator, "you're exactly what you appear to be, a loyal guard." "Which makes you the most dangerous variable of all." Before Marcus could respond, an alarm shrieked through the corridor. Not the medical alert or security breach warning. This was older, deeper, triggering something primal in the palace's architecture. The walls themselves seemed to recoil. "The Queen's summons?" Zayla whispered, her patterns flashing white with something Marcus had never seen before. "Fear. All parties to the throne room. Now." The voice's command echoed through every neural implant in the palace. "By order of the Queen Mother, the investigation has concluded. All witnesses will attend judgment." Marcus and Zayla exchanged a glance, the accusation between them suddenly insignificant. In his 6 months at court, the Queen Mother had never called an emergency judgment. The Zyrene prided themselves on deliberation, on centuries-long decisions. This was unprecedented. They ran together through corridors filling with courtiers and guards, all flowing toward the throne room like blood rushing to a wound. Marcus kept pace with Zayla despite her longer stride, his training overriding the casual pace of diplomatic duty. Something fundamental had shifted. He could feel it in the way the palace's organic walls contracted, in the silent terror rippling through the assembled nobles. The throne room doors stood open, their massive frames revealing the Queen Mother risen from her seat for the first time in living memory. Her shadow stretched across the assembled crowd like judgment itself, and standing in the center of the chamber, surrounded by guards with weapons drawn, was a small Zarine child Marcus had never seen before, holding something that gleamed with terrible familiarity, a human medical injector. The Queen Mother's voice resonated through the chamber, through Marcus's bones, carrying weight that predated language itself. Let the accounting begin. Marcus felt every eye turned toward him, felt the weight of species and treaties and wars balanced on whatever happened next. The child looked up at him with eyes too old for her small frame, and smiled with knowledge that made his blood freeze. He'd been right about one thing. Everything was a threat. He just hadn't known the threat was already inside. The Queen Mother descended from her throne, each step causing tremors through the crystalline floor. Marcus had studied Zarine physiology, knew that their queens grew continuously throughout their lives, accumulating mass and neural complexity until they became living archives of genetic memory. But knowledge was different from witnessing her approach, watching her shadows swallow the light itself. "Captain Marcus Chen of Earth," she said, her voice layered with harmonics that bypassed his ears and spoke directly to his nervous system. "You have served in my daughter's guard for 173 days. In that time you have demonstrated competence, discretion, and an admirable resistance to courtly intrigue." Marcus remained at attention, acutely aware that 23 weapons were trained on his position. The child with the injector stood motionless, her small hands steady in a way that suggested extensive training. "In that same period," the Queen Mother continued, 3 suitors have fallen ill during the courtship trials. Each collapse followed the same pattern. Neurological disruption, organ failure, death within hours despite our most advanced medical intervention. Her eyes fixed on Marcus with the weight of continental plates. The physicians found human genetic markers in the toxin. The throne room erupted in controlled chaos, courtiers whispering through their bioimplants, guards adjusting their positions, ambassadors calculating political ramifications. Marcus felt the trajectory of his life narrowing to a single point. "Your Majesty," he said carefully, "I request permission to speak." Denied. The Queen Mother gestured, and holographic evidence materialized around the child. Medical scans, chemical analyses, surveillance footage. "The evidence is compelling. A human weapon, human methodology, a human guard with access and opportunity." Zayla stepped forward, her patterns blazing defiant orange. "Mother, this is absurd. Captain Chen has been vetted by every security protocol we possess. His neural signature shows no deception, no hostile intent." "Precisely," the Queen Mother said, and something in her tone made Marcus's tactical instincts scream warnings. "Which is why I know he is innocent." The silence that followed was absolute. The Queen Mother moved toward the child, who finally showed emotion, a trembling that started in her hands and spread to her entire small frame. "My granddaughter Ciora has served in the medical corps for 7 years, despite her youth. Brilliant, dedicated, trusted with the most delicate procedures." The Queen's voice carried grief like bedrock beneath lava. She has also been in contact with the Kelver Consortium, who have spent generations attempting to destabilize our dynasty. "Great-grandmother, please. The Kelver promised you recognition," the Queen Mother said, her tone gentle despite the word's brutality. "They promised that if you removed the traditional suitors, I would be forced to consider their candidates. Candidates who would have married your Aunt Jaila, then slowly poisoned her until you could claim the succession through your mother's lesser line." "Wait," bringing her enormous frame down to the child's level. The gesture sent shockwaves through the assembled court. No one could remember the last time a Zirian queen had knelt for anyone. "You chose to implicate Captain Chen specifically," the Queen Mother said softly. "Why?" "Because he's human. Because no one would question it. Because," she looked at Marcus with eyes full of hate and fear and something desperately young, "because he doesn't belong here. None of them do. This is our world, our dynasty, our future. Not theirs." The Queen Mother stood slowly, her shadow returning to engulf them all. "And there," she said, "is the poison that nearly destroyed us." not in an injector, but in the belief that worth is determined by world of origin rather than quality of character. She turned to Marcus, and her expression held something he'd never seen in alien features before. Respect. Captain Chen maintained his post during 3 medical emergencies without breaking protocol. He identified security vulnerabilities in our palace that our own guards missed. He learned our language, our customs, our history without complaint or arrogance. She paused. And, most tellingly, when my granddaughter framed him for murder, his first concern was escorting the princess to safety rather than defending himself. Marcus felt the weapons lower fractionally, felt the political currents in the room shift like tides changing. "Mother," Zayla said, her voice strange, "what are you saying?" The Queen Mother looked at her daughter, then at Marcus, then at the assembled court with its 1,000 representatives from 1,000 worlds. "I am saying that the courtship trials have been corrupted by politics and poison. I am saying that traditional methods have failed us 3 times over." Her next words fell like hammers. "And I am saying that there is precedent, ancient and rarely invoked, for a queen to approve a suitor outside the normal trials." The throne room erupted. Ambassadors shouted protocols. Courtiers activated emergency communication channels. Guards looked to their commanders for guidance that wasn't coming. Zayla's patterns cycled through every color Marcus had learned to recognize. Shock, anger, confusion, and something that might have been curiosity. "You cannot be serious." "The law is clear," the Queen Mother said. "A queen may approve any candidate she deems worthy, provided they pass 3 trials of her design. Not the public courtship rituals, but tests of character known only to the candidate and the crown." She turned her full attention to Marcus, and he felt the weight of empires in her gaze. "Captain Marcus Chen, I have observed you for 173 days. I have watched you protect my daughter without expectation of reward. I have seen you honor our customs while maintaining your own integrity. I have tested your reactions to provocation, temptation, and crisis." Marcus's mouth went dry. "Tested? The drunken ambassador who insulted you in the 3rd month. My agent. The security breach that forced you to evacuate the princess alone. My design. The artifact that appeared in your quarters, priceless and easily stolen. My placement." The Queen Mother's expression held grim satisfaction. "You passed every invisible trial I set before you?" "This is madness!" An ambassador from the Valorian delegation stepped forward. "You would throw aside centuries of tradition for a human? A species barely beyond their own planetary system?" "I would choose character over pedigree," the Queen Mother said flatly. "I would choose proven worth over political advantage, and I would choose the candidate who saved my daughter's life twice without being asked." Marcus blinked. Twice? Shazila's patterns had gone very still, settling into a deep amber that Marcus had never seen before. "The structural failure in the East Wing last month," she said quietly. "You pulled me back before the ceiling collapsed. I thought it was coincidence." "There are no coincidences in this palace," the Queen Mother said. "Only tests, and Captain Chen, you have passed them all save 3. 3 trials remain before you could be considered worthy of my daughter's hand. Marriage to an alien princess. A union that would reshape diplomatic relations across a 12 star systems." His mind raced through implications. Earth's struggling colonies suddenly having access to Zyrene technology, trade routes, protection, or the catastrophic failure if he refused, if he ran, if he proved the xenophobes right. "Your Majesty," he managed, "I'm honored, but—" "The first trial," the Queen Mother interrupted, because apparently his consent was assumed, "is already underway. You have maintained composure and dignity while being accused of murder before the assembled court. You have resisted the urge to defend yourself with violence or political maneuvering." She gestured to the still assembled guards. "Trial 1. Forbearance in the face of false accusation. Passed." Marcus felt control slipping away like water through his fingers. "I didn't know I was being tested. The best trials are the ones we don't know we're taking," Zayla said, her voice carrying an odd note. She was watching him with new intensity, patterns shifting through colors he couldn't interpret. "What are the other trials, Mother?" "The second trial must be witnessed only by the candidate in the crown," the Queen Mother said. "It will take place in the Chamber of Ancestors at the Dark Moon 3 days hence." She turned to her guards. "Take my granddaughter to the holding cells. She will face tribunal for her crimes against the dynasty." Siora screamed as they led her away, her small voice echoing prophecies of doom and purity and the poison of human ambition. Marcus watched her go, this child assassin shaped by hate, and wondered how many others in this vast palace shared her views. The Queen Mother dismissed the court with a gesture, sending ambassadors and nobles scrambling to recalculate alliances. Within minutes, only Marcus Zazela and the Queen remained in the cavernous chamber. "You should have asked my permission," Zazela said to her mother, patterns flashing angry crimson. "I am Queen. I do not ask permission. I am your daughter, and the one being offered like a prize. You are my heir, and the future of our dynasty." The Queen Mother's tone softened fractionally. "Tell me truly, daughter, when Captain Chen was accused, what did you feel?" Zayla's patterns cycled through several colors before settling on deep violet. "Concern. He's been a good guard. And when I announced the trials? Curiosity? Not revulsion? Not outrage at the thought of bonding with a human?" Zayla turned to look at Marcus directly, her multiple eyes studying him with unnerving intensity. "He's short. His skin doesn't shift colors. He can't perceive half the spectrum I see or hear the resonances that carry our deepest emotions." She tilted her head. "But he runs toward danger instead of away from it. He learned our language in 2 months when most species take years, and when I accused him in the corridor, he didn't flinch." "That's not an answer," the Queen Mother said. "It's the only answer I have right now." Zyla's patterns shifted to something Marcus had learned meant contemplation.
3 days until the second trial?
3 days. And Captain Chen will need preparation. He can't enter the Chamber of Ancestors without understanding what he'll face. You will tutor him, but remember, daughter, the trial must be his alone. Cannot intervene. My understanding, Zyla gestured for Marcus to follow. "Come, Captain."
We have much to discuss.
Marcus fell into step beside her, his mind still reeling. As they left the throne room, he caught the Queen Mother's expression, satisfaction mixed with something that might have been hope. "Your Highness," he said as they entered the corridor, "I should mention that I never agreed to any of this." "I know." Jayla's patterns flickered with what might have been amusement. "Do you want to refuse?" It was a fair question. Marcus thought about Earth's struggling colonies, about the children growing up in resource scarcity while alien worlds thrived. He thought about the weight of responsibility that had followed him from battlefield to diplomatic post. He thought about the very real possibility that he was being manipulated by forces he couldn't understand. Then he thought about standing his ground while accused of murder, about pulling a princess from a collapsing ceiling because it was the right thing to do, about the strange feeling he developed over 6 months of watching Zayla navigate impossible political waters with grace and steel. "No," he said finally, "I don't want to refuse." Good. Zayla led him deeper into the palace toward chambers he'd never been permitted to enter, because the second trial is going to make the first one look gentle. The Chamber of Ancestors doesn't test your composure, Captain, it tests your soul. "And the third trial?" Her patterns went very still, settling into a silver Marcus had never seen before. "If you survive the second trial, my mother will tell you herself. Some knowledge must be earned." She stopped before a massive door carved with symbols that predated human civilization. "Beyond this point, you enter the deep palace, the parts we don't show outsiders. The secrets that hold our dynasty together." Marcus looked at the door, at the princess beside him, at the path his life had suddenly taken. Every instinct screamed complications and danger and political quicksand. Every tactical lesson he'd learned said to refuse, to retreat to Earth, to avoid entanglement. But he'd spent 6 months learning that instinct wasn't always wisdom, and retreat wasn't always survival. "Then I'd better start learning," he said. Zayla's patterns blazed with something that might have been approval. She pressed her palm to the door and it opened onto darkness that seemed to breathe. "Welcome," she said, "to the real test." The Chamber of Ancestors existed in a space that made Marcus's eyes hurt. Geometry bent wrong here, following rules that predated Euclidean certainty. Walls curved in dimensions he couldn't track, and the darkness wasn't absence of light but presence of something older. "The Zirine evolved in deep caves," Zayla explained, her bioluminescent patterns providing the only illumination. "Before we reached the surface, before we built cities or ships, we lived in places where reality was thin, where the boundaries between thought and matter weren't quite solid." Marcus kept his breathing steady despite the pressure building behind his eyes. "What am I supposed to do here? Survive 3 hours alone with your own truth?" Zyla's voice carried echoes that suggested the chamber was much larger than it appeared. "The ancestors don't care about strength or intelligence. They care about integrity. About the alignment between who you claim to be and who you actually are. That's unusually cryptic even for royalty, because I can't explain it better without violating the trial's conditions. She turned to face him, patterns shifting through nervous colors. Captain Marcus, what happened to the suitors wasn't random medical failure. The chamber kills anyone whose internal contradictions exceed a certain threshold. Anyone who lives a fundamental lie. Marcus felt cold understanding settle into his bones. The Valorian noble who died first. What was his lie? He claimed to desire partnership but actually sought subjugation. His neural patterns and his stated intentions were in such conflict that the chamber, she made a gesture that suggested dissolution, rejected him. And the others? Greed masked as generosity, ambition disguised as love. The chamber has no tolerance for self-deception. Jayla's patterns flickered towards something that might have been concern. You're human. Your psychology's different from ours. I don't know if the chamber will even work the same way on your neural architecture. Meaning I might die for different reasons than the others? Meaning you might die for no reason at all, or survive despite carrying contradictions that would destroy a Zyrene? She moved toward the chamber's entrance. 3 hours. If you emerge, the trial is passed. If you don't, you'll find me dissolved by ancient alien truth detection? Something like that. She paused at the threshold. Marcus, if you have any fundamental lies you're telling yourself, now would be the time to confront them. Thanks for the warning. I'm serious. The chamber doesn't care about small hypocrisies or normal self-delusions. But if there's something core to your identity that you're refusing to face, something you've built your entire self-concept around despite knowing it's false, she didn't finish the sentence. Marcus thought about his reasons for accepting this impossible situation. About Earth's needs versus his own ambitions. About duty versus curiosity. About the strange attraction he felt toward Zayla that he'd been carefully not examining too closely. I'll face whatever I need to face, he said. Zayla studied him for a long moment, then nodded. 3 hours. The chamber will seal behind you. She turned to leave, then stopped. Marcus? For what it's worth, I hope you survive. That's almost touching, Your Highness. You're the first guard who hasn't tried to manipulate me or use me for political advantage. I'd hate to lose that. Her pattern shifted to something soft, and my mother is rarely wrong about character. Then she was gone, and the massive doors swung shut with the finality of tombs. The darkness was immediate and total. Marcus's eyes strained for any input, but the chamber gave him nothing. He could hear his own heartbeat, feel the rough stone beneath his boots, taste the recycled air in his lungs. Then the whispering started. Not voices exactly, more like the echo of thoughts that had soaked into these walls over millennia. Zyrene ancestors processing their own contradictions, confronting their own lies, either emerging purified or dissolving into component atoms. Marcus forced himself to breathe slowly, to maintain the discipline that had carried him through 3 wars. But the whispers found cracks in his armor, sliding into his consciousness like smoke. Why did you really accept the trials? For Earth's benefit. For the colonies that needed Zyrene technology and trade access. Liar. The word resonated through his skull, not spoken but somehow present. Marcus gritted his teeth. Fine. Not just for Earth. For himself. For the chance to be something more than a minor diplomatic guard, to matter in the vast political machinery of galactic civilization. Closer. But still lying. The darkness pressed in, and Marcus felt something like fingers brushing his thoughts. The chamber was reading him, parsing through his self-deceptions with the patience of geological time. He thought about the moment Zayla had accused him of murder in the corridor. His hand had twitched toward his weapon, but he'd stopped. Why? Protocol? Self-discipline? No. Because some part of him had already decided that Zayla's life was worth more than his own defensive instincts. Worth more than the potential insult to Earth if he'd drawn on a princess. Worth something fundamental that preceded calculation. Truth, the chamber whispered. Continue. Marcus felt the pressure ease fractionally. The whispers faded to background hum, and in the absence of sensory input, memory rose like tide. He remembered the first time he'd seen Zayla, 6 months ago. He'd expected alien features to trigger his combat training's threat response. Instead, he'd been struck by the elegant efficiency of her movement, the quick intelligence in her multiple eyes, the way her patterns shifted to convey emotions more honestly than any human face. He remembered the structural collapse, his body moving before his mind caught up, pulling her back from crushing death. The brief moment when she'd looked at him with genuine gratitude, patterns blazing gold. He remembered standing guard during courtship trials, watching suitors from 100 worlds offer wealth and power and genetic compatibility, and feeling something dark and possessive that he'd carefully locked away. Name it, the chamber demanded. Jealousy, attraction, the dangerous desire to be more than the guard who watched from the periphery. And why did you lock it away? Unprofessional. A violation of his duty as Earth's representative. Liar. The darkness pressed in again, crushing, forcing honesty from him like air from lungs. Because he was afraid that what he felt was impossible, that the gulf between human and Xerian was too vast, that his attraction was one-sided and pathetic and would only lead to humiliation. Truth. What else? Marcus felt tears he couldn't see tracking down his face. The chamber had found the deepest lie, the one he'd been telling himself since the moment the Queen Mother announced the trials. He'd told himself he was accepting for Earth's sake, for duty and honor and greater good. But the truth was simpler and more selfish, and more terrifying. He wanted Zayla. Wanted her mind that danced through political complexity like it was choreography. Wanted her courage and her dry humor and the way her patterns blazed defiant in the face of impossible expectations. Wanted to know if the strange connection he felt was real or just his own lonely imagination. Truth, the chamber whispered, and the word carried approval that resonated through his bones. Final question. If the trials fail, if the Queen Mother rejects you, if Zayla herself refuses, will you still stand guard at her door? Yes. Without question. Without resentment. Because his duty wasn't conditional on reward, and his care for her safety wasn't dependent on reciprocation. Truth, the chamber said, and the darkness began to recede. Sufficient. Light returned gradually, revealing the chamber's true dimensions. Smaller than the darkness had suggested, carved with symbols Marcus could now somehow read. Generations of Xerene who had stood here, confronted their own contradictions, and either emerged whole or not at all. The doors opened. Zayla stood waiting, her pattern shifting through relieved green. 2 hours and 47 minutes, she said. You survived. Marcus stepped out of the chamber on shaking legs. Your mother's definition of a trial is deeply disturbing. The best ones usually are. She studied him with new intensity. You look different. I feel different. He met her eyes, multiple orbs, that saw in spectrums he couldn't imagine. Your Highness, I need to tell you something. If it's a confession extracted by the chamber, you're not required. I'm not doing this for Earth. The words came out flat, factual, the truth stripped of comforting lies. I mean, yes, the political benefits would help my species, but that's not why I accepted the trials. I accepted because I wanted to. Because he forced himself to continue despite every diplomatic instinct screaming warnings. Because I want you, and I need you to know that before the final trial. Marcus braced for rejection, for mockery, for the end of whatever strange relationship had developed over 6 months of proximity. Instead, her pattern shifted to silver, that rare color he'd only seen once before. The third trial, she said quietly, is truth between candidate and heir. You were supposed to face my mother again, to demonstrate honesty under political pressure. Her patterns flickered. But you just passed it. Right here. What? My mother is rarely wrong about character, Zayla repeated her earlier words. She knew you'd survive the chamber, knew you'd emerge, ready to speak truth even when it was dangerous. She moved closer, her height forcing Marcus to look up. And she knew I'd been waiting 6 months for you to say exactly what you just said. Marcus's tactical mind finally caught up. She set this up, all of it. The Queen Mother plays games with centuries as time frames. Zayla's pattern shifted through colors Marcus was learning meant fondness. Did you think the courtship trials were actually about finding me a suitable match? Half those suitors were obvious disasters. She was testing me as much as them, testing to see if I'd recognize worth when it came in an unexpected package. And did you? I pulled you aside 3 months ago after you corrected my tactical assessment of the palace defenses. Do you remember what I said? She'd laughed at his audacity in correcting royalty, then asked him to train her personal guard in human combat techniques. It had been the first time she'd treated him as anything other than furniture. I remember. That was the moment I started seeing you differently. Not as Earth's representative, not as a guard. Her patterns blazed gold, as someone who treated me like a person rather than a political asset. Your Highness, if we're speaking truth, use my name. Gisela, Marcus said, and the familiarity felt like stepping off a cliff. Your mother approved this. But what do you want? She was quiet for a long moment. Patterns shifting through complex combinations, Marcus was still learning to read. Finally, they settled into deep violet, contemplation and decision merging. I want to know if this is real or just proximity and political pressure creating illusions, she said. I want time to understand if what I feel is genuine or just gratitude for 6 months of someone treating me like I have worth beyond my genetics. Her patterns flickered. But I also want to find out, and that means completing the trials. There's still a third trial? Not the one my mother planned. But there's always another test. Zayla gestured, and guards appeared from alcoves Marcus hadn't noticed. The council will convene tomorrow to debate my mother's choice. They'll argue precedent and genetic compatibility and political ramifications. They'll question your worthiness, your species' value, your right to even stand in the same chamber as Zirian royalty. Sounds delightful. You'll need to defend yourself, to prove not just that you're worthy, but that our union would benefit both species. Her patterns went serious. No one can help you. Not me, not my mother. You'll stand alone before the council and convince them that a human has a place in our dynasty. Marcus thought about the implications. Political theater on a galactic scale. Every word analyzed, every gesture measured against centuries of tradition. One mistake could destroy Earth's diplomatic relationship with the most powerful species in this sector. When you say it like that, he said, the chamber that dissolves liars seems almost gentle. The council tests external conviction. Jayla's pattern softened. But Marcus, you don't have to do this. You've passed the ancestral trials. My mother approves. If you want to refuse the council's judgment, to return to Earth before this becomes more complicated, do you want me to refuse? I want you to choose freely, without political pressure, without feeling obligated by Earth's needs or my mother's games. She moved closer, close enough that Marcus could feel the electromagnetic field her skin generated. What do you want? Marcus thought about the easy path. Return to Earth, accept a commendation for his service, live a normal life without the weight of dynasties and species politics. He thought about the hard path, standing before a hostile council, defending his worth against millennia of tradition, potentially failing publicly and spectacularly. Then he thought about Zayla's patterns blazing gold in the moment she'd laughed at his audacity, about her mind that could calculate political trajectories while maintaining genuine kindness, about the possibility that what he felt was real and reciprocated and worth fighting for. I want to try, he said, even if I fail, even if the council rejects me. I want to stand up and make the case for why our differences might be strengths rather than obstacles. Jayla's patterns blazed with something brilliant and complex. Then you'd better prepare. The council convenes at dawn and they won't be gentle. She turned to leave, then paused. Marcus? Thank you. In a palace full of masks and political theater, that's rarer than you know. Then she was gone, leaving Marcus alone with guards who would escort him to quarters he'd never been offered before. Royal guest chambers, reserved for candidates who had passed the ancestral trials. He had 12 hours to prepare arguments that would either change the course of human-Zir relations or end his diplomatic career in flames. Marcus found he was smiling anyway. The council chamber made the throne room look intimate. It stretched across what must have been an entire palace wing, with seating for representatives from every major Zirine house and a dozen allied species. Marcus stood at the center, a lone human in a sea of alien faces, and tried not to think about the billions watching via holographic transmission. The Queen Mother presided from her throne, massive and motionless. Zayla sat at her right hand, patterns carefully neutral. The council members filled their seats with the slow ceremony of those who knew they held power. Chancellor Vorum opened the proceedings, his elderly frame hunched, but his voice still carrying authority. The Queen has invoked ancient right to approve a candidate outside traditional trials. We are gathered to determine if this candidate meets the standards our dynasty requires. His 4 eyes fixed on Marcus. Captain Marcus Chen, you stand accused of insufficient genetic compatibility, cultural incompatibility, and political unsuitability. How do you answer? Marcus had spent the night reviewing Zirine history, political philosophy, and precedent. He'd also thrown out every careful speech he'd prepared and decided to trust the honesty that had carried him through the chamber. I don't answer them, he said clearly. I reject the premise. The chamber erupted in controlled chaos. Vorum raised his hand for silence. You reject our council's authority to question you? I reject the assumption that worth is determined by genetics or cultural origin. Marcus kept his voice steady. You're asking the wrong questions. The question isn't whether I'm genetically compatible with Princess Xyela. The question is whether I can stand beside her as an equal partner in the impossible task of ruling. Arrogance, someone called from the assembled council. Honesty, Marcus corrected. I'm human. I'll never see the color spectrums Xyela perceives or hear the harmonics that carry your deeper emotions. My lifespan is a fraction of hers. My neural architecture is completely different. He paused. But I can learn. I can adapt. And I can offer perspectives that no Zerine suitor could provide. What perspectives? Vorim demanded. What could a species barely beyond their own star system teach us? Marcus had anticipated this. Survival, despite limitation. Innovation born from scarcity. Unity forged from diversity. He gestured to the assembled representatives. Your empire spans 100 worlds, but you're still one species. Humans built civilization from a dozen competing nations, hundreds of cultures, thousands of languages. We learned to cooperate despite fundamental differences. You also learned genocide and war, Counselor Thane interjected, her patterns blazing accusatory red. Yes, Marcus didn't flinch from the history. We learned both. We failed catastrophically and recovered slowly. We're still learning. But that's exactly my point. We know what it's like to bridge impossible divides, because we've had to do it or die. And you think this qualifies you to marry our princess? Vorim's skepticism was palpable. I think it qualifies me to understand the stakes. Marcus turned to address the full council. The Zerine dynasty has maintained stability for 10,000 years through careful genetic selection and political tradition. It's an impressive achievement. It's also reaching a critical point. Explain, the Queen Mother said, speaking for the first time. Marcus took a breath. This was the gamble, the argument that would either convince them or end everything. Your stability comes from homogeneity, from shared neural architecture, shared cultural values, shared understanding of what it means to be Zerine. But the galaxy is changing. You're encountering more species, more cultures, more perspectives that don't fit your traditional frameworks. Eventually, homogeneity becomes brittleness. You suggest we're weak? Thane's patterns blazed dangerously. I suggest you're approaching an evolutionary crossroads. You can maintain absolute genetic purity and risk irrelevance as the galaxy diversifies around you. Or you can adapt, incorporate new perspectives. Demonstrate that the Zerine dynasty is strong enough to include difference rather than just tolerate it. By marrying a human to our heir, Vorim said flatly. By proving that worth transcends species. By showing that what matters isn't genetic compatibility, but alignment of values, intelligence, and commitment. Marcus looked directly at Xyela, whose patterns had shifted to something intense. Princess Xyela will rule one day. When she does, she'll face challenges that 10,000 years of tradition haven't prepared you for. She'll need advisors who can think differently, who can see problems from angles your neural architecture might miss. You think very highly of human cognition, Counselor Cern observed. I think diversity of cognition is valuable. Human, Zerine, Valerine, Kelthani, every species brings different processing, different insights. Marcus spread his hands. I'm not claiming humans are superior. I'm claiming we're different. And in a galaxy that's becoming more interconnected and complex, different is an asset. The Queen Mother leaned forward slightly. You argue from pragmatism, but marriage is not merely political alliance. What of genuine partnership? What of the personal connection between you and my daughter? This was the moment. Marcus could retreat to political arguments, could keep this analytical and safe. Or he could trust the honesty that had carried him through the chamber. I love her, he said simply. Not because she's a princess, or because our union would benefit Earth. I love the way her mind works, the way she navigates impossible political situations with grace and steel. I love her dry humor and her courage and the fact that she treats people like they matter rather than like their tools. He smiled slightly. I love that she corrected my combat tactics while we were under fire and was absolutely right to do so. Love, Vorim said, and his tone suggested the word was suspect. Emotion is not sufficient foundation for dynasty. Love is the only foundation that matters, the Queen Mother said, and her words carried weight that silenced the chamber. I have watched Captain Chen for 6 months. I have tested him in ways he knew and ways he didn't. I have observed his interactions with my daughter, his responses to stress, his choices when no one was watching. She paused. I have seen him choose integrity over advancement, truth over diplomacy, and Xyela's well-being over his own safety. These are not the actions of someone seeking political gain. These are the actions of someone who has found something worth protecting. Your Majesty, Thani said carefully. With respect, your personal approval does not override the Council's concerns about genetic compatibility and cultural integration. No, the Queen Mother agreed. Which is why I am not ordering the Council to approve this union. I am asking my daughter what she wants. Every eye turned to Zayla. Her patterns cycled through rapid shifts. Surprise, consideration, determination. She stood slowly, her full height, commanding the chamber's attention. My mother has ruled for 3,000 years, Zayla said. In that time she has chosen genetic compatibility over personal connection. She has maintained our dynasty's purity and strength through careful selection. Her patterns shifted to something sad. She has also been alone. No partner could match her neural complexity, her accumulated wisdom, her sheer presence. So she ruled without companionship, without equal partnership for millennia. The Queen Mother's expression didn't change, but something in her stillness suggested truth striking home. I don't want that, Zayla continued. I want a partner who challenges me, who sees perspectives I miss, who treats me as a person before a princess. She looked at Marcus. I want someone who pulled me from a collapsing ceiling without calculating political benefit first. Someone who spent 6 months learning our language and customs without complaint. Someone who stood before the council and argued for diversity as strength. You want a human? Vorim said, making it sound like accusation. I want Marcus. Shayla's patterns blazed defiant crimson. And I am willing to spend the rest of my life proving that this choice strengthens rather than weakens our dynasty. The chamber fell silent. Marcus felt the weight of history balancing on this moment, felt the political currents swirling around him like riptides. Chancellor Vorim exchanged glances with other council members, their patterns shifting through complex communications Marcus couldn't fully parse. Finally, he spoke. The council will vote, but first, Captain Chen, one final question. Vorim's gaze was sharp. If we approve this union, you will be bound to the Zyrene dynasty for the remainder of your natural life. You will be expected to produce heirs, to integrate into our culture, to prioritize the dynasty's well-being above Earth's interests when they conflict. Can you make that commitment? Marcus thought about Earth, about the colonies, and the billions who would benefit from stronger Zyrene relations. He thought about the career he'd built, the identity he'd constructed around being Earth's representative. Then he looked at Zayla, patterns blazing with hope and fear and determination, and realized that some choices transcended politics. Yes, he said. I can make that commitment. Then we vote, Vorim announced. The voting took 3 hours. Representatives debated precedent and genetic theory and political ramifications. Some argued passionately for tradition, others for the potential benefits of human-Zyrene integration. The holographic transmission carried the debate across star systems, and Marcus knew that whatever happened here would reshape diplomatic relations for generations. Finally, Chancellor Vorim stood to announce the results. By council vote of 743 in favor, 691 opposed, we approve the Queen Mother's selection of Captain Marcus Chen as suitable candidate for union with Princess Zayla, provided he survives the final trial. Marcus blinked. There's another trial? Did you think we would make this easy? The final trial is simple but absolute. You will undergo genetic modification to extend your lifespan closer to Zyrene baseline. The process is painful, dangerous, and irreversible. If you survive, you will live for centuries. If you don't, I'll die, Marcus finished. Yes, the Queen Mother's gaze was steady. This is not symbolic. We are asking you to literally transform yourself, to bridge the biological gap that makes human-Zyrene partnership difficult, to demonstrate commitment not just in words but in willingness to endure suffering for the chance at partnership. X's patterns had gone white with fear. Mother, the survival rate for cross-species genetic modification is 63%, the Queen Mother said calmly. Captain Chen, you are not required to accept this trial. You can decline with honor. The Council has approved you in principle, but without extended lifespan, you and my daughter would have at most 50 years together before age took you. Marcus did the math. 50 years versus the chance at centuries balanced against 37% mortality. The calculus was brutal. When would this happen? He asked. Immediately. The modification must begin within hours of council approval to prevent political interference. The Queen Mother gestured, and medical staff emerged from side chambers. You have 5 minutes to decide? Pattern cycling through fear and hope. Marcus, you don't have to do this. 50 years is not enough. He met her eyes. I survived your mother's tests. I convinced the council. I'm not backing down now because the final challenge is physical rather than political. The pain is... She stopped, patterns flickering. I watched the process once. It's like having your DNA rewritten cell by cell while you're conscious. They can't use anesthesia because it interferes with the modification. You'll feel every second. How long does it take? 72 hours. Marcus thought about his military training, about surviving interrogation simulations and field medicine without painkillers. He thought about the night he'd spent in the Chamber of Ancestors, confronting truths that had torn at his psyche. He thought about Zayla's patterns blazing gold when he'd confessed his feelings. I'll survive, he said. You can't know that. No, but I can choose to try. He smiled at her despite the fear crawling up his spine. Besides, if I die, at least it'll be for something that mattered. Zayla's patterns went through a dozen shifts before settling on deep violet mixed with gold, grief and admiration merging. You're either the bravest human I've ever met or the most foolish. I accept the final trial. The medical staff moved forward with equipment Marcus recognized from trauma surgery but had never seen used for genetic modification. The Queen Mother nodded slowly. The dynasty honors your courage, Captain Chen. Whatever happens in the next 72 hours, know that you have already proven your worth. She glanced at Zayla. You may stay with him through the first 12 hours. After that, the medical staff must work in isolation. They led Marcus to a medical chamber deep in the palace's core, a sterile space filled with technology he didn't fully understand. The medical team explained the process in clinical terms. Nanotech would rewrite his genetic code, extending telomeres, enhancing cellular repair, fundamentally altering the mechanisms that determined human lifespan. The human body would resist. It would fight the changes as invasion. And he would feel every moment of the war between old genetics and new. We begin when you're ready, the chief physician said. Marcus lay back on the medical platform, felt restraints engaged to prevent involuntary movement. Zayla stood beside him, one hand resting near his. Last chance to refuse, she said softly. Not a chance. He managed to smile. Though you could do me a favor. Anything. Shala's patterns shifted to something fierce. You won't quit. I know you well enough to be certain of that. The physician activated the modification sequence. Marcus felt the first nanomachines enter his bloodstream, felt them begin their work. Then the pain hit, and the world dissolved into sensation that transcended description. The first 12 hours were the worst. Marcus's body fought the modifications with every defense evolution had provided. Fever spiked to levels that should have caused brain damage. His muscles spasmed hard enough to crack bones against the restraints. The nanomachines rewrote his DNA strand by strand, and each alteration felt like being unmade and reassembled incorrectly. Through it all, Zayla stayed beside him. She couldn't touch him. The medical field prevented contact, but her presence was constant. When the pain drove coherent thought from his mind, her voice was the anchor that kept him from fragmenting completely. You're doing well, she said during hour 7, when his screams had reduced to hoarse gasps. The physicians say your cellular resistance is lower than expected. You might actually survive this. Marcus tried to answer, but could only manage sounds. Don't try to talk. Just listen. I'm going to tell you about the Zirine concept of Kalesh. There's no human translation, but it's closest to the beauty found in transformation. We believe that the most valuable moments occur when something fundamental changes, when the impossible becomes possible through willingness to endure. She talked for hours, her voice weaving through concepts and history and philosophy that Marcus's pain-racked mind could barely follow. But the cadence helped, gave him something to focus on besides the sensation of being rebuilt at the molecular level. When the 12 hours ended and Zayla had to leave, Marcus wanted to protest. But the words wouldn't come and she was already gone, replaced by medical staff who monitored vital signs with clinical detachment. Hours 13 through 48 blurred together. Marcus lost the ability to track time, lost the coherent sense of self that distinguished him from the pain. He existed in a space where nothing mattered except surviving the next second, then the next, then the next. He hallucinated, saw memories from his childhood mixed with scenes that had never happened. Fought battles that had ended years ago, had conversations with people long dead. Through it all, something stubborn in him refused to quit. The same determination that had carried him through wars and diplomatic nightmares now kept his consciousness tethered when it would have been easier to drift away. Hour 49 brought a change. The pain began to shift quality, becoming sharper but more localized. The physicians increased monitoring, their patterns shifting to surprised green. His integration rate is exceeding projections. one said. The human adaptability factor is stronger than predicted. Hour 60 showed measurable success. The nanomachines had completed 70% of the genetic rewriting, and Marcus's body had begun accepting rather than fighting the changes. The pain remained intense, but it no longer threatened to fracture his mind. Hour 70 brought Zayla back. Marcus heard her enter through the haze, felt her presence like light through fog. 2 more hours, she said softly. Marcus, can you hear me? He managed a sound that might have been affirmation. The physicians say you're going to make it. The modification is taking hold. Your cellular repair is already enhanced, your telomeres extending, your system's adapting. Her patterns blazed gold. You're doing the impossible. Marcus focused on her voice, used it to drag himself back toward coherent thought. 2 more hours. He could survive 2 more hours. He'd survived everything else. Hour 70, one brought a crisis. His cardiovascular system, stressed beyond design parameters, began failing. Alarms shrieked. Medical staff flooded the chamber. Through the chaos, Marcus heard Zayla's voice. Fight. Marcus, you've come this far. Don't you dare quit now. He shouldn't have been able to hear her over the alarms and medical activity, but somehow her words cut through everything, found the part of him that had survived wars and trials and pain that should have broken him. His heart stabilized. The crisis passed. The modification continued. Hour 72 arrived with the suddenness of dawn. The nanomachines completed their work and deactivated. The medical field dropped. The pain, which had been Marcus's entire universe for 3 days, began to fade. He opened eyes that saw colors he'd never perceived before, breathed with lungs that processed oxygen with new efficiency, moved fingers that responded to neural commands with enhanced precision. The chief physician ran final scans, patterns shifting to amazed green. Impossible, but confirmed. The modification is complete and stable. Captain Chen, you have successfully undergone cross-species genetic enhancement. Your projected lifespan is now approximately 740 years. Janir was beside him immediately, her patterns blazing every color Marcus could name and several he couldn't. You did it. You actually did it. Marcus tried to speak, managed a rasp that might have been words. Don't talk yet. Your vocal cords are still adapting. She placed her hand near his, not quite touching. The council has been notified. The trials are complete. If you still want this, if you still want me after what you've just endured, Marcus gathered strength, forced his enhanced vocal cords to function. Yes, commitment and choice and the certainty that came from surviving transformation. Zayla's patterns shifted to silver. That rare color Marcus had learned meant joy too profound for simpler expression. Then we have approximately 700 years to figure out if this was brilliant or insane. Probably both, Marcus managed, and heard himself laugh despite everything. The Queen Mother entered the chamber, her massive presence filling the space. She studied Marcus with ancient eyes, then nodded slowly. The trials are complete. The council has voted. The candidate is proven worthy through forbearance, truth, and transformation. She turned to Zayla. Daughter, do you accept this human as your bonded partner, your equal in rule, your companion through the centuries ahead? I do. Then by the authority of the Zareen dynasty and the approval of the assembled council, I recognize this union. The Queen Mother's expression might have been satisfaction. Captain Marcus Chen, you are no longer Earth's representative guard. You are consort to the heir, partner to my daughter, and proof that worth transcends species. She leaned closer, her voice dropping to something almost gentle. You have 700 years to make this work. Don't waste them. Then she was gone, leaving Marcus and Zayla alone in the medical chamber with the weight of dynasties and species and impossible choices finally settling into something like certainty. So Jala said, her pattern shifting to playful amber, what do we do first with our 700 years? Marcus looked at her, this alien princess who had become something far more important, and smiled. Learn to see the colors you see. Understand the harmonics I'm missing. Figure out how to rule an empire that's never had a human consort. He paused. And maybe eventually convince your mother that her games with centuries-long time frames are deeply disturbing. Zayla laughed, the sound like chimes celebrating. 700 years might not be enough for that last one. Together they walked from the medical chamber toward the future they'd both chosen. Difficult and unprecedented, and worth every moment of pain. Behind them, the chamber's monitors showed vital signs that proved transformation was possible. that the impossible could become real through willingness to endure, that love, in the end, was the most powerful trial of all. And somewhere in the deep palace, the Queen Mother watched holographic reports and allowed herself the smallest smile. Her daughter had chosen well. The human had proven worthy. And the dynasty, after 10,000 years of careful homogeneity, was finally ready to embrace the strength found in difference. The future would be complex and challenging and unlike anything the Zyrene had known before. It would be perfect. Two halves